Hello there, my dear. Today I'm going to be reading another book from Graham Oakley, and this one is The Church Mice Spread Their Wings. There's Samson the cat, and there's Arthur and Humphrey with a map. Let's see what this one is all about. They spread their wings. That means they travel around. Humphrey the school mouse had been reading again. On one pleasant afternoon in Wordlethorpe churchyard, he began to lecture his fellow church mice. "We have become victims of the rat race," he told them, "crushed by the pressures of modern life. Our nerves are being torn to shreds in the mad struggles for survival." At this moment, everyone went indoors for tea. And what are they doing? They are giving little love hugs, talking to each other, taking naps, playing with butterflies, playing games with beads, having all types of fun. But during tea, he started up again. "We must escape the toils of society," he declared. "We must seek the woods and fields where we can gambol amidst the buttercups and have our fevered brows soothed by the cool fingers of Mother Nature." Just then, a crumb went down the wrong way, and his friend Arthur had to take over. "A weekend in the country will do us all good," Arthur said. "And, speaking as a practical sort of chap, I suggest a party leaves each Saturday morning, gets its fevered brow soothed, and returns in time for tea on Sunday. Samson will act as escort. He'll have to give up all his weekends, of course, but he won't mind." Samson woke up long enough to say he jolly well did mind, and then tried to get back to sleep. But by this time, the mice had got Humphrey's message. They made it very clear that their return to nature was not to be spoiled by Samson's selfishness. As a church cat, Samson had taken a solemn vow never to harm mice, so there was nothing he could do but agree. On thinking it over, however, he wasn't too depressed. Mice being mice, it seemed possible that the first outing might be the last. All the same, he made a secret wish that something terrible would happen just to be on the safe side. That evening, Arthur organized the drawing of lots to make up the first party, and Humphrey brought out his map and explained exactly where they would be going. The following morning, they set off early. In stretches, the going was a little rough, but even a church cat has his pride, and when the mice were out of danger and Arthur said, "Now I see why I brought you, old chap," Samson did not reply. He just wondered what happened to cats that broke vows. When they reached the riverbank, they began to enjoy the peace and quiet of the countryside. Does that look like peace and quiet? It looks like bugs and bees and spiders everywhere. After they had enjoyed quite a lot of peace and quiet, Arthur, who had found a boat, suggested a river trip. Everyone thought this a splendid idea. Even Samson, though something made him faintly uneasy. He couldn't think quite what. But it wasn't long before he remembered. He remembered that there's a waterfall up ahead. And down they go, hanging on to the board, hanging on to Samson's fur, hanging on to his whiskers, hanging on to his tail. Luckily, everyone held on tight, because when they surfaced, they found themselves being tossed by gigantic waves. "We've been washed out to sea. All is lost," shrieked the mice. However, in due course, their boat hit a rock and they were able to struggle ashore. A wet cat included. There they are. When Mother Nature has finished soothing our brows, perhaps she could give us a good rub down as well, said Samson bitterly, as they stood dripping by the water's edge. And there they are. And where have they washed up? This made Humphrey very angry. Here we are, cast up on a foreign and exotic shore, and all you can do is make silly jokes, he snapped, studying the map, which had got a little damp. Where are they really? They're at a beautiful park, Wardlethorpe Park, but they believe that they have traveled all across the world. According to my calculations, where are the mice? Oh, there they are. According to my calculations, we're in China, he said, probably on the Pongyang Peninsula. We're in Wardlethorpe Park, muttered Samson. Rubbish, cried Humphrey. Look over there. We're in India. Cats know nothing about geography. This was too much for Samson. If the mice wanted a foreign and exotic shore, they could have one. Crumbs, you might be right. So now Samson's going to tease them. Crumbs, you might be right. Here comes a great spotted Indian mouse-eater, he cried. Run for your lives. It's just a Dalmatian doggy. And there they go running, but they hadn't run far when he shouted, Stop! A lesser scarlet Indian mouse-swallowing water snake. Oh, and look, some of them are fainting. They're so afraid. With mouse-eaters behind and mouse-swallowers ahead, the mice were convinced their last hour had come. Samson was heard to remark that creatures who were just walking dinners should have stayed at home in the vestry, but all the same he showed them a way to escape, and they got past the water snake safely. Then the jungle closed in. The mice grew more and more tetchy and homesick. They said it would be nice to see some proper British flowers instead of these nasty, vulgar, foreign-looking things. They glowered at Arthur and Humphrey and grumbled about how they could have been having a nice, cozy tea now if it wasn't for some people's rotten ideas about Mother Nature and weekend trips. Finally, Samson, who never stayed bad-tempered long, decided to take pity on the mice and lead them home by a shortcut he knew across the sand pits. But as soon as he saw the sand, Humphrey resumed command. My calculations are correct, he announced importantly. We have reached the Sahara Desert. Samson pointed out a steeple and some oak trees. There's the steeple of the church and the oak trees. By pointing out a steeple and some oak trees, and said you didn't see many of those in the Sahara, but Humphrey only looked at him pityingly. There are such things as mirages, you know, he said. Deserts are full of them. Cats know nothing about natural science. Samson stopped feeling sorry for the mice and followed grimly along behind as Humphrey led them into the trackless wastes of Sahara. They were soon hot, thirsty, and lost, and if Arthur hadn't spotted an oasis, there's no saying what might have happened to them. Is that really an oasis? It's a tire track with some water in it. But a drink and a dip soon made them feel better, and they might have all succumbed to the spell of the desert if Humphrey hadn't insisted on giving a long lecture on the origins of curious rock formations found by Humphrey in an uncharted region of the Sahara, which didn't last as long as he intended. What What's happening? Rumble, 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 rumble. Something is coming on the way. Oh my. Earthquake, shouted Arthur. Every mouse for himself. Fortunately, there was only one way to run. And there they go. The Sahara ended at the river, where they scrambled onto a branch of driftwood because Humphrey said it was dangerous to stay on land in the vicinity of a seismic fault. We are now in the Mediterranean Sea, he announced. If we turn right at Gibraltar, we should be home in time for dinner. It took some time to cross the Mediterranean, but eventually they reached the opposite shore. It seemed rather thickly populated, but they saw that someone had very kindly left a line for them to make fast to. So they're going to tie on to the fisherman's line. Ahoy there, my man, shouted Humphrey. Is this England? The man shouted back something rather rude, but very British, so they knew they were back home at last. Once more on British soil, there were some very emotional scenes. Humphrey said a few words about Britannia welcoming her wandering sons back to her bosom, and Arthur hummed Land of Hope and Glory. Everyone agreed that now they'd seen the rest of the world, you couldn't beat good old England. And there's the fisherman trying to untie his knotted mess of a fishing line, and Samson the cat is thinking of eating some of those worms. Except that it was rather late and beginning to rain. As the mice got colder and wetter, they began to say that England was going to the dogs, and everyone agreed it was little wonder people emigrated and went aboard for the holidays. Then the rain stopped. The moon appeared, and everyone agreed that it was awfully nice to have a changeable climate, and they couldn't understand why people went abroad at all. Arthur and Humphrey stepped out into the open to take a quick bearing on the pole star and set a course for home. Humphrey was just remarking on how lovely it was to live in a country where a fellow could walk about at night in perfect safety when an absolutely terrible thing happened. At first, they were too shaken to speak, but after a while, Humphrey said in a trembly kind of voice, apropos of nothing, what do barn owls eat? Small mammals, said Arthur. Ah, interesting, said Humphrey. What is a mouse? It is a small mammal. Oh! After they'd flown a little further, Humphrey said in a casual sort of tone, just for the sake of conversation, how big, approximately speaking, would you say small mammals are? As big as us, said Arthur. Ah, interesting, said Humphrey. But at least they're home. Oh, no. But when they saw that the owl had brought them to their own church tower, their spirits rose a little. Arthur decided to try the friendly approach. Jolly decent of you to give us a lift home, old chap, he said. We'd like to stay for a bit of chinwag, but it's past our bedtime, so we ought to be toddling. Nighty-nighty, old sausage. They started to walk away, but didn't get very far. Whoosh, and there's the dust, and he's grabbing them. When the owl was sure they couldn't escape, it dropped off to sleep. The mice could not help feeling things looked a little bleak. Oh my, what kind of bones are they? Next to the mice, Those are mouse bones. Humphrey gave way to morbid reflections upon mortality, but Arthur passed the time more usefully. And look what Arthur did. He put stones under the owl's foot, and the owl thinks it still has them as it takes its little nap. They thought they had fooled the owl rather neatly until they discovered that without mountaineering equipment, there was no way out of the belfry. They can't climb down that ladder. The owl awoke feeling agreeably hungry. When it found that its claw was full of stones and its breakfast was attempting a getaway, it lost its temper completely. Oh, the owl is angry. Run, Humphrey, run, Arthur. They escaped by the skin of their teeth. The owl was beside itself, but knew it only had to wait. There was no way out of the cupboard either. Oh, and there's the owl, looking at them. Humphrey became fatalistic. He said that the hand of destiny was raised against them. The sands of time had run out. The book of fate was closed, and there was no fighting against what was written in the stars. Piffle, said Arthur, because it jolly well wasn't written in the stars. He'd thought of a plan. It took them the whole day. The owl is watching them. Luckily, they found the remains of someone's fish paste sandwich, which kept them going. By nightfall, everything was ready, but the owl had become very suspicious. They decided to wait until morning, because owls sleep during the day. When at last the owl finally nodded off, the sun was long up, and they had almost abandoned hope, but it was now or never. And they have to sneak right past the owl. Oh. Humphrey muttered grumpily that if mice had been meant to fly, they would have been born with wings, but he was only jealous because it was Arthur's idea. Oh my. Oh. Whoosh, whoosh. Circle, swoosh, swoosh. It's a short, pleasant journey from the church to the parsonage, but the way they went was neither short nor pleasant. And they're going to go flying right through the window right through the doors, swoosh, into the pastor's surreal. And when they arrived, they were not at all welcome. The parson pointed out that as prominent church mice, they were supposed to set a good example. Much more of this sort of thing, he said severely, and no gentleman of the cloth would be able to take a well-earned glass of port without finding half a dozen mice frisking about in it. And there they are in his surreal. He demanded to know which of them was responsible for such a foolish, harebrained prank, and without any hesitation they told him. They're each pointing at each other. And while they had a bit of breakfast, he went on with the talking to. After that, he sent them packing back to the vestry. On the way, they met a friend. Somehow, his greeting seemed a bit odd. And here they've shown up to their own memorial. They soon saw why. At first, everyone was terrified, but when they realized that it really was Arthur and Humphrey and not their ghosts, everyone turned very nasty. They said that the two mice were a pair of wet blankets for showing up in the middle of their own funeral and spoiling all the fun. After a while, however, they calmed down, particularly as something had to be done about the food. So they had a party instead of a funeral and ended up enjoying themselves in spite of the disappointment. As for Samson, he was quite pleased to see the mice again. He had been feeling that their frightful fate was all his fault because of his secret wish that something terrible would happen. So it was a weight off his conscience when they turned up alive and fairly well. Best of all, their adventures were sure to put an end, once and for all, to the whole idea of weekend jaunts. Samson had a drowsy feeling that the mice of Whortlethorpe Church would resist the mad pressures of the rat race without further help from Mother Nature, and pleased with his own sagacity, resourcefulness, and patience, he drifted off into a peaceful snooze at last. So this little card, there's a picture of them laying at rest, just like the statue of the medieval soldier was cut in stone to look just like him. They've drawn pictures of Arthur and Humphrey into statues with a cat sleeping under their feet. And it says, in memory of Humphrey and Arthur, taken about last Saturday night in the flower of their youth, from all the vestry with lots of love. And there are flowers and food, but now they get to have a party. Those silly mice.